Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the statewide Digital Equity Planning Group meeting. I have the honor of being your facilitator today. You're going to receive numerous updates about key program areas and accomplishments, and we're also going to be reminded of our why. It's always our true north is important, and I think that's a good way to start off. And so, as we go to the agenda slide, we'll quickly highlight what you're going to hear today. We have had many testimonies on our road and our journey as we were traveling the state to all the digital equity and BEAD events. We will hear from a youth co-director and really a poetry about the spoken word. We will start off with him. And then we will get an update from the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy regarding the equity plan, the status of where we are. We are also, as always, last mile and where we are in relation to the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, which is also known as BEAD. We will also receive an update from California's federal program officers and the National Telecommunications Information Administration, also known as NTIA. And then we'll talk about the multi-pronged approach we're taking as the state digital equity planning process is underway, and really the delivery of the plan that is really what we're focusing on. So after each presenter's agenda, I will pause and ask for comments and questions from the members, the group members. And then we will first go to the room, and then we'll ask people remotely via Zoom to raise their hand to be called on. Finally, we'll conclude today's meeting by addressing public comments and questions from, of course, the public. The next slide, we are wanting to talk about how the state is taking great care to ensure that the community stakeholder feedback is incorporated in the Broadband for All. Broadband for All is about all and being inclusive and making sure that individuals have an opportunity to have a voice in the process. So we want to talk about that. And as such, we have developed that process that allows engagement in multiple formats, because not one format is ideal for everyone. So we want to make sure we were out there communicating in multiple channels. So we've obviously had outcome area working groups. We've had surveys. Hopefully a lot of the community had participated in survey. I think it's probably the most participation, if I've heard before, than any state in the nation. We've also done some asset inventory, regional planning workshops, and of course, public engagement. All are designed as a complementary process that provide many opportunities and platforms for stakeholders and individuals to participate in person and online when possible. In addition to the California Broadband Council member work group, we've expanded to include other state agencies and entities who provide services for the covered populations and have subject matter expertise related to the policy areas that we are impacting. Thank you, because people matter. And as I said in the last board meeting, it's people remember what we do more so than what we say. And this is about action and getting equity and internet and broadband for all and in the hands of the unserved and underserved residents of California that have needed it for so long. So with the first person that I have the honor of introducing, and maybe some of you might actually recognize the presenter. He was at the local planning group that we held in the Bay Area. Jacob shared his personal reflections on the digital divide through spoken word and poetry. And we are so happy to have him here today. So Jacob Vergas, if you would please just go ahead and inspire us even more just as you did when we were seeing you at the Bay Area event.
Absolutely. Thank you again for that introduction, Miss. My name is Jacob Vergas, and I am a spoken word activist. I actually wrote this piece for the digital divide. I was commissioned to write this piece for the organization School to Home and some of the other digital inclusion partners. So without any further ado, the name of this piece is simply called The Digital Divide. Well, what is the digital divide? Is it a great big firewall stretching 100 meters tall? Or valley-wide gaps between software, hardware, or a connection anywhere at all. What is the digital divide? Well, it can be defined as the multitude of technological space that keeps some folks stuck in the Stone Ages. From not being able to print out your own papers or organize a Google spreadsheet, to even searching for free Wi-Fi up the street, the effects of this divide cut deep. Deep like, my mama owes AT&T, so I can't Google Meet today. Deep like, well, we only have one laptop and my dad said it's my brother's day. Deep like, I've never even had a device to play. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the Bay, one kid has 3 laptops and 4 PlayStations. I'd like to think that this digital divide can be sliced into 3 different stages. The first is the economic divide, which has been around since the beginning of time, but is by technological inclines. As the demand and need for newer tech and higher speeds increases, the wellness of the common man declines. Now, whether it's the stress on his or her mind to keep up with the times, device after device, or network speed slow as molasses causing him strife, it's the disparity of the dollar behind this slice. Second is the divide in usability. Lack of education on how to use our tech efficiently. You see, while some kids here living in the Silicon Valley are learning coding, engineering, and editing, all starting at the age of 3, there's others whose fingertips won't type 2 words on a keyboard till their late teens, who don't know what artificial intelligence, cloud storage, or encrypted file means. And even if the families who do have the financial means to purchase these things, they don't necessarily have the digital literacy to pass down to their seed. Finally, is the gap in the empowerment. Similar to the first, but listen close. Big businesses' main goal is to promote to who's buying and selling the most. And some will argue that that's just how business goes. But that leaves very, very little hope to that little boy or girl from Oakland, from East Palo Alto, from San Jose, that wasn't exposed to tablets at 10, typing teachers at 12, coding courses before bedtime. Because quite frankly, mommy and daddy worked all the time. All I can do is sigh. That good old Silicon Valley grind. Fast forward to global pandemonium, sending the whole world online. Something that we never thought we'd see with our own eyes. Traumatizing, no doubt, but we must keep on with our lives. New routes to pave out, but we are not on our own. Creativity forced us to transform houses into more than just homes. From a home to a 5-star restaurant. From a restaurant to an architect's workstation. And from a workstation to a family's ultimate fun zone. And one organization literally brought school to home. Aunts and uncles turned to tutors. Hours of workshops turned parents into teachers too. 10 core components that elevated families' views. Affordable Wi-Fi, laptops, and tablets for students to use. Though the pandemic moved school to home, the power remained. Needs, providing technological resources and opportunities for youth and families that look like me, that look like you, to create a world where coding classes are colorful, where affordable Wi-Fi is an unalienable right, where little black and brown boys and girls have Apple pencils and tablets to write their destinies out with. Teams like School to Home and the San Jose Digital Inclusion Partnership help close this digital divide, one strong connection at a time. Thank you so much.
I think all of us are clapping here. Mr. Burgess, very inspirational. You remind us of our why we're here, why we are taking this unprecedented investment and making a difference in communities that have been, potentially marginalized, as you were saying. So poetry, amazing. I think most of us got chills. So thank you so much. I would like to, normally I know this is an unofficial board meeting, it's more advisory group, but if there's anybody that wants to make a comment, I'd love to open it up to anybody before we go to the next agenda items. Mr. Adams, it looks like you want to make a comment.
Yeah, I just, Jacob, it was so great meeting you in the Bay Area in Oakland. And, I think I told you then, and I just want to reiterate it again. When we met, that was the 17th of 17 workshops that we had done, and we had been all over the state, and we had been hearing about all of the common and, specific barriers that the digital divide presents for those most impacted by it. And I got to tell you that your home had all of our staff literally in tears, and they were like, that summarized in one poem why we're doing this and like what we learned. And so thank you for bringing your voice to that event and to bringing your voice to this platform to really center this collective body that's going to be developing a digital equity plan for the state to remind us of why we're doing this and to give voice to, why this is so important. So just thank you very much. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much, sir. Good to see you as well.
Thank you. I guess, well, thank you again so much. You're more than welcome to listen in, or because there's lots of great updates if you want to know what's going on, Jake. You're more than welcome. We're going to go ahead and go to the second agenda item, which is general updates. The first person up is Mr. Scott Adams, the Deputy Director of the California Department of Technology for Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy.
So thank you, Director Bailey Cremens, and shall I say good afternoon to the members of the statewide planning group and the members of the extended statewide planning group and family that we've all created here for developing the digital equity and BEAD plans. Can we please turn to the next slide? I'm just going to give a general update. We know how critical this is, and as Jacob or Mr. Burgess's home really underscored, that California's always had a digital divide. It's been a persistent one that we've been working towards, but then the COVID pandemic really exacerbated that and created some additional urgency to solve this issue. So when we look at this, it's not just the fact that there's a disparity in equity and that there's a need to provide equitable access to services, but that it's without those, people are, cut off and not able to fully engage in life. So we work at speeds faster than we're commonly accustomed to. because we need to meet the need, and not, create a longer wait for folks to get the services and the skills and the training that they need. So we've all had to lean in. But that being said, what we wanted to share with the planning group here and with members of the public is that, it's been less than a year since the state received its digital equity planning grant. And beginning in October, this slide depicts 12 key steps or actions that we have taken, starting at the left-hand corner with the Broadband for All Digital Equity and BEAD kickoff that we collectively hosted in October, to developing this statewide planning group, which extended the California broadband member entities and added, as Director Bailey Kremen said, the 12 additional entities with direct and specific connection to covered populations or subject matter expertise, and the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve, through digital equity. Creating a working groups, our 6 working groups on those policy priorities, developing our phone survey and our online survey and the DEEM tools, the regional workshops, the tribal consultations. There's a lot. And I think, at the right-hand side of the corner, the big thing that we've done now is we've expanded our team, and we've expanded this multi-layered network of broadband advocates that are all working to and have been working to close the digital divide. Only now we're a little more familiar with each other. We better know how our efforts can align with each other, and we're committed to coordinating and driving this to the finish line in the appropriate time. If we could go to the next slide, please. What we did want to say is that, California is a big state. It's 167,000 square miles, and it's almost 40 million folks. And a lot of the need is, spread out through every corner of every county, of every city, of every town in this state. There are pockets of underinvestment in urban and suburban areas, and there are large swaths of unserved folks in rural areas. And so, as Director Bailey Kremen said, we tried to create a process that was as cross-cutting as possible to allow for as much input from as many residents, as many partners, stakeholders, subject matter experts, in ways that met them where they could, whether it was to jump into a meeting virtually, to participate in a working group, or go to a workshop. That's what we did. And so collectively, literally over the last 10 months, we've been able to create over 50,000 engagement opportunities to allow folks a chance to weigh in on just what's needed for this digital equity plan. So, wanted to give thanks to everyone who's here, who's contributed to where we are, because we're about to turn a corner from engagement to data analysis and producing the digital equity plan that will have some other steps, but then get to the finish line. And I think, is this my last slide? Yep. I want to hand it over to Commissioner Houck. Oh,
That's fine, Commissioner Houck.
Thank you. And again, I just want to thank everyone that's been involved in all of the efforts. The community, the California Broadband Council, the CDT, CPUC, Caltrans, CETF. Over the last couple of years, we've seen just historic once-in-a-lifetime investments in both dollars and time for eliminating the digital divide. And we need to really make the most of these efforts. We talked about earlier this morning in the California Broadband Council meeting some of the various programs we have that are actively engaging community and moving forward with eliminating the digital divide. Today, I want to talk about the BEAD program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment program, which the PUC has been charged with administering for the state. And so one of the things that we have been doing in conjunction with CDT is the community engagement meetings. There's been, 17 community engagement meetings we've done jointly, 3 in-person regional tribal consultations, and 1 virtual tribal consultation. Pleased to announce in June, I know at many of those community engagement meetings, we talked about the state potentially being allocated anywhere from $900 million to $2 billion from the NTIA's $42 billion program. And, pleased to again announce that we received $1.86 billion that was allocated to California to deliver reliable broadband to unserved communities. And this $1.86 billion is allocated again by NTIA for last mile broadband deployment. And the PUC is charged with establishing the program rules in an initial proposal that needs to be provided to NTIA by the end of this year. We also have a 5-year plan, which is sort of a summary of what that initial proposal may look like. That has been issued publicly, and we're taking public comments on that as part of our rulemaking that we opened in February, and that is R2302016. If anyone's interested in getting information on that rulemaking, that is the docket number. And the scoping memo was issued last week, and the initial plan again was also issued, and the comment dates, our initial comments are due August 7th and reply comments are due August 11th. So we again have through the end of this year to move forward with that rulemaking, where we will be holding public workshops. We'll be holding a public participation hearing to hear from the public, issuing a staff proposal that will be an initial draft of the initial proposal that will be going to NTIA. We're also working very closely with NTIA to make sure that we're including all of the program requirements in that initial proposal. Part of what we'll be doing through this rulemaking process is also developing the challenge process consistent with NTIA requirements. And once the initial proposal is approved, the commission's going to basically adopt a proposed decision that will become a decision that will be that initial proposal. We will then move forward with the challenge process that'll be outlined as part of that proposal. Early next year is when we anticipate that happening. Once the challenge process has run, we will then run a grant application process and propose subgrantees. So again, that initial proposal is going to set the groundwork and the rules for moving forward with the grant application process. And then after the grant application process has occurred and we have the proposed subgrantees, all of that will be wrapped into what will be a final proposal that gets submitted to NTIA. And we will have 12 months from NTIA's approval of the initial proposal up until the time we have to submit that final proposal. So it may sound like a long time, but it really isn't. So we really encourage folks to be engaged, to work with us, help us out, but we do have a fast timeline here, and these are federal mandated deadlines. So we hope you have some patience with us, and also make sure to work with us and get us that feedback so we can have it incorporated. The primary goal of the BEAD program is to deploy reliable last mile service to all unserved locations, and unserved locations are defined as areas that lack speeds that are less than 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload via reliable technology. Reliable technology through the BEAD guidance is generally defined by federal rules as fiber or advanced cable wireline connection. Where this is not feasible, fixed wireless can be used as an alternative. I know we've already received many comments from fixed wireless folks as to where that line is, and we're again encouraging you to be involved, provide us the feedback, and help us develop the best possible rule that's going to get the most access expanded as possible. Next slide. Oh, we're already there. So this slide is basically a timeline that kind of runs through a lot of what I've already talked about, but I'll just do a quick overview for where we're at. April, July 2023, we did the public outreach events in conjunction with CDT. August of 2023, we need to submit the 5-year action plan, and we're currently taking comments on that now. August to December, we're going to seek input on the rules via our rulemaking process that's opened, and that'll develop and finalize our initial proposal, which will get submitted to NTIA in late December. In 2024, after the initial proposals approved by NTIA, we're going to conduct the challenge process and then solicit applications and select the sub-grantees, which will all be wrapped into our final proposal that will be submitted. We're anticipating that timeframe will be early 2025 to NTIA. And it is due 365 days after the initial proposal is approved. So if that occurs in early 2024, we will have till early 2025 to submit that final proposal. And that final proposal will set out the proposed allocation for that $1.86 billion. And available if there's any questions or.
Thank you so much. Before we go to questions, I would like to, since we did roll call, I want to acknowledge some additional members that have joined. So if we just document, we have Office of Emergency Services, Department of General Services, Department of Aging, Department of Rehabilitation, and GovOps. Thank you very much. All right, I will, I know Sunny is always first to ask any questions. So Ms. McPeak, would you like to make some comments to what you heard from Mr. Adams or Commissioner Houck?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I just am the most ignorant, so I have more questions to ask. I do, Commissioner Houck, thank you for the update. And I, every time I hear the presentation, I learn more. My question goes to, in your rulemaking on BEAD, are the states constrained by the map that NTIA produced for, or the FCC produced for NTIA? Are you able to provide greater flexibility? I guess is the question that I'm asking with respect to your ability on rulemaking.
So I am speaking off the top of my head at the moment, so my staff may want to correct me. But my understanding is yes, we do, but that said, so we do need to use the federal map, but we also have guidance from the NTIA on what the challenge process looks like. And so that is something we'll be discussing in the rulemaking process. We'll be looking at how the challenge process can work and how that may provide us some additional flexibility. And we'll be continuing to have ongoing discussions with NTIA about where there are flexibility within their rules. But we do need to use their map, but we are working to try and make sure we can have as much flexibility as possible.
I'll thank you very much for that response. I ask it because I know there are lots of communities that are listening who think when they're looking at their maps or at the maps that somehow they're not going to be able to fully get to all of the most disadvantaged residents. And I'm just trying to encourage the continuing conversation with you and seeing how they can put together a really coherent proposal.
No, and that's a really good point. And I think that's part of what the challenge process is also there for in looking at, well, an NTIA can maybe answer some more specific questions about how much flexibility there is with their map. But I do want to also make sure folks are aware, because it can be kind of confusing, especially if they're new to this, that there are different maps. There's the FFA map, there's the CASF map, there's the federal map for the BEAD program. So making sure they're looking at the right maps and addressing either challenges or contesting areas to the right entity is also important. And I think that messages like what you just stated and highlighting that at the various meetings we went to was very, very effective, because people did respond and let the FCC know that there was issues or problems with the map. And that resulted in us getting allocated more funding than I think we initially had thought we were going to get. So it does make a difference when people are watching these things.
Thank you.
Thank you. I also see Miss Ellis raising her hand.
Thank you, Director Bailey Crimmins and Commissioner Hauk. Yes, I just wanted to add on to that, that we will be developing yet another map at the CPUC specifically for the BEAD program. We, as the Commissioner said, do have some additional flexibility in terms of how while we have to start with the FCC fabric, the NTIA in the fabric delivered to us by the federal government. We can have some flexibility in terms of how we validate some of that information and treat some of that information to get further refinements for California. As the Commissioner stated, a lot of that is working its way through. Some of that is going to be addressed in our proceedings, so we can't fully speak to that until that moves through that process. But certainly, we anticipate being having more granular, doing some additional refinements, certainly to that initial map. And lastly, I want to just note that per the NOFO for BEAD, the first 20% of the allocation that is coming to California of that 1.86 billion actually must be targeted towards particularly underserved communities as part of the NOFO. So we do know that there is a priority and a premium by the NTIA on first serving those that are most unserved and most vulnerable.
Thank you, Miss Ellis. Did you want to say something else?
I was going to say,
Something?
perhaps Commissioner Hauk now wants to repeat the dates of when of the proceeding, because everybody out there who has these issues needs to really understand what you said, Commissioner, and what Maria just underscored. This is the avenue for them to get on the record.
Yeah, yes, it is. And the proceeding will be moving very quickly for the PUC, which means we have to have this proposal done by the end of the year. We are taking comments on the 5-year plan right now, August 7th. Our initial opening comments are due, reply comments August 11th. We will be holding a workshop. We're tentatively looking at sometime around October. There will also be a public participation hearing. And we'll be taking comments throughout the proceeding, both on the staff proposal as well as public comments can be submitted through the docket card in the proceeding, which again is R2302016. And written comments can also be taken. And then again, at the public meetings, we'll be taking verbal comments.
Thank you. Very informative. Thank you for all the questions, because that's where we clarify. We receive questions, and that just allows people to know, especially with those dates coming up so quickly. Is there any other questions from any of the members, either in the room? I don't see any in the room, but is there anybody remotely? All right, I see none. So we're going to go ahead and go to agenda item number 4. Actually, no, agenda item number 3, sorry. From the Federal Program Office, the state lead for NTIA, where we have the honor of having Gladys Palpatok. So thank you very much, and look forward to hearing your update.
Thank you so much, Ms. Crimmins. We really appreciate being here, and thank you for having NTIA today. And we echo the kudos said earlier for CDT and CPUC and their teams on the successful and extensive outreach and engagements this past spring. We were lucky enough to be a part of that, and it was really energizing to watch. We acknowledge all the hard work that it took, and you join other states around the country in similar efforts with their local communities. So congratulations on that. We're entering into the most important part of this year-long planning phase. As Commissioner Hauk already mentioned, there are critical upcoming opportunities through the end of the year to engage and submit comments to both CDT and CPUC on the Digital Equity Plan, initial proposal, and challenge process. So we highly encourage your participation. NTIA has been working closely with CDT and CPUC, participating in the state planning group sessions, working groups, and the workshops, including the three tribal consultations. It's also heartening that there have been over 25 requests from individual tribes for additional follow-ups for one-on-one consultations with them. And we're happy to join in that as needed. The capacity grant NOFO, or the notice for funding opportunity, is coming up next, and it's expected in early 2024. It's a $1.4 billion fund nationwide to implement the digital equity plan that the state will be drafting with your input. And California share will be allocated by formula, and it will be administered by the state. It's important, again, to submit comments on the draft digital equity plan that CDT will release sometime this fall. The competitive grant NOFO, or notice of funding opportunity, is expected in the second half of 2024, and it is a $1.25 billion fund nationwide for digital equity activities and will be administered by NTIA. NTIA has been tracking the progress of California, and it's offering, and states are opting into no-cost extensions to utilize unused funds for additional work and to fulfill funding gaps between the planning phase and capacity grants. In terms of BEAD, you've heard a lot already, but I'll reiterate the current rulemaking at the CPUC is important to understand the initial proposal and the challenge process being developed. This really is the meat of where community input is critical. NTIA has a model challenge process available that states can wholly adopt or customize. I'll share the link to the model challenge and accompanying webinar in the chat after I finish. This is another important opportunity to submit comments for communities to engage and weigh in with the CPUC later this year. NTIA also continues to meet with stakeholders to help guide them through all of these processes and to have them also engage with CPUC and CDT as necessary. Thank you again for the all hands on deck effort for Internet for All in California, and happy to answer any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Palpatak. Always wonderful to hear from NTIA. Any questions from the dais? Any questions remotely? Okay, none at this time. Well, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and shift to agenda number 4, and I will be introducing again Mr. Scott Adams, who will then provide a handoff to each of the groups that have been a part of this digital equity planning process. So Mr. Adams, if you'd like to go ahead and present.
Thank you, Director Bailey Crimmins. Hello again, everybody. So what we wanted to do here, I know we gave a high level couple slides at the beginning, is to try to get a little more granular to the extent we can. We're still analyzing a lot of data, reviewing feedback, but we are working on the production of the digital equity plan. So I wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the inputs and what we're learning thus far. If you go to the next slide, please. Always want to center all of our work and conversation about digital equity and BEAD, about those who are most impacted. As all of us know from our own personal lived experiences, that the digital divide impacts the most vulnerable among us. Specifically, given that the NTIA, who you just heard from, is going to be the grant administrator for, potentially another $2 billion to go to this work. They have also asked states to direct investments for 8 covered populations. We're mentioning these. We know that California has a lot of populations that we focus on, including the unhoused and others. So this is a non-exhaustive list of what we will focus on, but what we're asked to focus on by the NTIA. So covered households at or below 150 percent of the federal poverty line, aging individuals, justice involved individuals, veterans, those with disabilities, individuals with language barriers, including low levels of literacy, members of racial or ethnic minority groups, those who reside primarily in rural areas, are the first 8 that are shaded slightly different. And that's because those are specifically called out in the Digital Equity Plan Notice of Funding Opportunity and in the Digital Equity Act that states must focus on boxes number 9 and 10, women and those who identify as female, and the LGBTQI plus community are specifically called out in the BEAD NOFO and plan as groups that have been historically underrepresented in the workforce as it relates to broadband. And there's some extra focus there. Next slide, please. So like we said, we're going through this, pretty compressed and expedited period of engagement and acquisition of qualitative and quantitative data to inform the plan. We wanted to kind of take you back now and say, like, some of the core components of the state's digital equity plan are going to be, honing and refining the vision, the goals and objectives, which, many of which are outlined in the state's Broadband for All Action Plan, outlining the process for engagement, really putting out some measurable objectives on, the plan, doing a needs assessment for the population, barriers for covered populations, develop an asset inventory, strategies on how we're going to implement the plan, how we're going to continue to engage, and how we plan on using not just the capacity and the competitive grants, but how we are going to braid in other types of funding, both government or philanthropic or private sector, to support the implementation of the plan. I know Commissioner Houck and in her update on the BEAD plan, really did us all a solid by helping to distinguish how BEAD funds are going to be used and how digital equity capacity grant funds are going to be used. As she indicated, BEAD first and foremost is about that last mile connectivity to unserved, underserved, and anchors. If there's more, I'm sure we would all love to spill those over into digital equity dollars, but the digital equity capacity grant dollars are going to go to fund those things that the state is already doing that were called out on the action plan, but aren't necessarily funded beyond, the California Advanced Service Fund programs, et cetera. So broadband adoption efforts, which we heard are so critically important, digital literacy training programs, digital navigation programs, interestingly, not just for residents, but for potentially for organizations like tribes and small cities and towns who want to navigate their own local digital equity plans, specific device distribution programs for specific parts of the subgroups within the covered populations, and then workforce training. And again, this is a non-exhaustive list, but it helps kind of distinguish the physical infrastructure service related to the back end work that's critical for digital equity. Could you advance the next slide, please? So here, we've had a lot of talk about, engagement opportunities, and we've had, the statewide planning groups and the outcome area working groups, the 6 that were developed, and then the workshops. And that's really allowing or inviting folks to engage. So we're going to give a quick update on what we're finding there. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we mentioned the pretty big effort for a relatively small team to do, or small team in a big state, to do 17 in-person regional planning workshops in every economic region throughout the state. It's a partnership that, was done with the Public Utilities Commission and all of, their communications and division staff. The California Emerging Technology Fund was contracted to help put these events together. The Governor's Office of Economic and Business Development, the Office of Tribal Affairs, others participated in these events. Planning was critical. All of the regional broadband consortia, many of the metropolitan planning organizations, RCRC, CSAC, and local CBOs and mayor's offices helped plan these events. So wanted to show you a picture, but also wanted to add some dimensionality to the look and feel of those. If there are members of the planning group or the public that weren't able to attend, to see how these events brought local folks and leaders together to directly engage on digital equity. So then the slide or the video we're going to see is a production that was put together by the San Joaquin Valley Broadband Consortia and the folks at Cal State Fresno, and just an amazing job at summarizing how these went.
Live in a state that has been thinking about broadband for many years and has just needed some additional tools to make sure there is broadband for all. So we are very excited to partner with California and each of you, each of the counties across the state, because so many of you have been working on this and saying there's an issue for a while. But now's the time, to really take your knowledge, take your experiences, and turn them into a plan that results in actual broadband, in actual training.
We have imminent need here, and even though we're one of the most progressive states in the country, there are still huge disparities in some of our rural communities in the Central Valley.
Affordability impacts all of us. It impacts adoption, and we have students doing homework in their cars. We have students doing homework on the city bus because that's where broadband is, because they don't have broadband in their home, and yet they live in Fresno, and everybody thinks Fresno's covered. It's not. I have students who live in Avenal, and we gave them a Wi-Fi, but it doesn't make a difference because there's no connectivity out there.
One of the ways is by trying to expand the universe of broadband providers. So we're not just relying solely on internet service providers. We're trying to empower counties, empower cities, empower joint powers authority, empower tribes to bring broadband to those places that have been ignored.
So all of us need to work together to make sure that folks in Fresno, the surrounding communities, and the region know about this program and are able to connect to it.
Thank you. And thanks again to the San Joaquin Valley Broadband Consortium and the Fresno folks. Just a really great job. And so we did say we were going to talk about a sort of a really condensed high-level summary of some of the findings from both the outcome area working groups and the regional planning workshops. And so I wanted to try to tie together some of the common themes that are going to work their way into the draft digital equity plan. And I think first and foremost was, across the state in every, nook and cranny and every place we talked about, there were identified common barriers faced by all covered populations. And those are, related to access, affordability, and adoption. And access, the most common one is just the lack of infrastructure to support service, or the lack of service if you're living in an urban area where not to be exclusive to multiple dwelling units in public housing, but there are constraints around access. We've also heard about, as was talked earlier, about, related to access, how broadband mapping, which the state is, led by PUC, done a lot of work on, needs to continue to be improved and to refine and hone our data to get more granular and specific. Because that mapping impacts the funding that comes down to the state to do that. So those are, some of the common barriers around access that we've heard on affordability. Again, it's just either folks in rural areas are paying way too much for alternative technologies that don't really fit the bill, or in other places in urban and suburban areas where there's lack of, say, competition or underinvestment, that people are paying more and getting less. At least that's the perception and the real and lived experience that has been communicated back to us, and that programs like the ACP are good, but that there's a low awareness of those programs, that there's a challenge in the enrollment process, and that more work needs to be done, particularly in a high-cost state like California, where the income eligibility for the programs might not be consistent and be able to empower those, as many of those in California who need it most. So that's a big one. And then on the adoption side, the common barriers around just the cost of home internet service, the cost and challenge of getting a device, and then the lack of perceived need and availability of digital literacy training. So those are a lot of the common barriers, but our charge isn't to just understand those. It's to also understand the specific and unique barriers that folks have been very generous in sharing with us. So if we can move to the next slide. I just want to caution folks, this is not an exclusive or exhaustive list, but in service of us, coming back and communicating to the statewide planning group members and the public that we actually are listening and we are hearing this, that we wanted to give a couple examples of what we're learning for each of the covered populations. And, on individuals who live in covered households, addition to, common barriers expressed is that just access, getting service to MDUs and public housing is a big constraint and barrier, and also how those are featured in state and federal broadband mapping efforts. Also, the challenges of getting services in covered households where you have, as is the case for a lot of, impacted folks by the digital divide, you've got multiple families living per unit. So those are a couple. On the aging individuals, again, non-exhaustive, what we're hearing is that lack of perceived need is a real issue in terms of, like, if we're making a home economic decision and is need for this, there's a need to overcome that you can't be monolithic when it comes to devices, that folks in this category need some specific and unique devices and technology to really empower and make them feel comfortable. And then digital skills training, but digital skills training that's at needs-based. Someone 6 year older is going to have a different set of needs than a K-12 child, or a workforce age person entering the workforce. When we look at incarcerated individuals, this is from a lot of input that we've received from the Department of Corrections and others, that limited opportunities, to connect prior to incarceration, a lack of training ability while incarcerated, housing and economic insecurity once folks re-entered the population, and then really the evolution of technology and how fast it moves while people are incarcerated no matter what length. But we've heard this at multiple workshops from actual folks who've experienced this, that that's a big issue. So I want to be efficient with our time and don't necessarily want to, you know, read all of these, but we'll share these slides out and want you to know that we really are taking and took this effort seriously to make sure we can understand what these unique barriers are, so that the strategies that you all suggested and that we all include in our plan can actually be funded and help address these barriers. You know, I'd be remiss to say that, you know, mistrust is a big issue. Language is another big issue, translated materials, literacy in, you know, a person's own language are huge for folks with language barriers, and, you know, many of them members of racial and ethnic minority groups. And so we heard that loud and clear. Next slide, please. So we wanted to just bucket some of the recommended strategies by access, affordability, and adoption. And in the interest of time, because we have a lot of other stuff to get into, really tried to align them around access, affordability, and adoption. And so expediting build out, deployment of alternative technologies are some of the top ones for access. On affordability, you know, enabling choice and competition through build out of the infrastructure, you know, requiring providers connecting to the middle mile to promote ACP and low cost offers, definitely continuing ACP, advocating for its expansion, enrollment improvement, and eligibility. And then on adoption was really conducting, you know, outreach in language and culture through trusted messengers, bundling outreach with service eligible, other programs like Medi-Cal, CalFresh, NSLP, and definitely driving it down to the community. So funding and empowering as granular as we can at the community level, so that those trusted messengers like promotores, librarians, community-based organizations are empowered to do this work. Next slide, please. Got it. So one of the components of our digital equity planning process was our phone survey. I'm going to turn it over to Sunny McPeak from CTF to just give an update on our shared work and some of the findings and our approach on that and how it's going to inform the digital equity plan.
Thank you, Deputy Director Scott Adams. What a pleasure it is, Madam Chair, to be able to share this piece of the input to the overall process on the digital equity and BEAD planning. Earlier in the slide presentation, Mr. Adams had a whole page of steps, and the phone survey is one of them. And it's an important input to complement all the others. And actually, I want to take this moment to acknowledge it. Even those who talked this morning as public commenters, Mr. Messick, Patrick Messick, Lily Ganges, and Philip Newfield, who were commenting on something else, were part of our planning partners in the workshops. So it is really a lot of shared activity among us. The phone survey has a particular role in this process, which is to be a scientifically reliable sample of the California population that then is complemented by everything else, including the online survey. So I want to put that in context. The goal in doing this telephone survey was to get to a what is called a margin of error, statistically a confidence interval of 3% or less. And so it was designed at that level of the size of the sample, and then to get to oversampling, where we can drill down to get more input from the populations that as a percentage of the total 40 million in California is very small, but very important for us to understand in more detail, especially when we're looking at the covered populations, including rural California. And so with that approach and that performance standard, the Department of Technology, the state of California, and CETF, who's conducted a statewide poll since 2008, joined forces and literally doubled the size of the sampling. So the first was a goal of 1,650 in if the statewide phone survey, and we did a combination of the completed surveys and then of the about 100,000 telephone numbers that were randomized that were not answered, calls that were made and either weren't answered or went to a answering machine. They were then sent the online survey. And that is that's a very huge randomized sample that I just said in order to get to those completed surveys. And when we finish, we will have 1,000, we have finished this 1,709, so exceeded the 1,650, which is a good report that we can bring you here today. The next set was a target of 1,550 that was oversampling in 3 groupings, one being rural residents, and I'll come back to that. The second being low income, even a more disadvantaged population. Generally, a proxy for that are those who have prepaid phones. And a third being the actual list of people who are served by the Department of Rehabilitation, so people with disabilities. All of these, the oversampling is also randomized. It's a randomized list of telephone numbers, and we will exceed that when we finish. We're now in the last phase of calling through to get 250 surveys from the list from the Department of Rehabilitation. So all of that is a lot of activity. It will be, as I said, then reliable statistically within a margin of 3%. Representative of California. The gradient you have, that pretty rainbow on the left, is the top line numbers that we can report to you. There's a lot of other data that goes into the analysis, but these we are very confident we can share with you. So overall, 91% of Californians are connected. They're connected at home to the internet. Within that, there's 3% that are unconnected. That's the bottom line. So the unconnected, the definition is they have a smartphone only. So they're connected to the internet at home, but with a smartphone only. And then, as you can see, people with disabilities, 90%, 91%, older residents, 90%, Latino households, 89%, low-income households, 87%, ACP eligible households who are not aware of the benefit, which is sort of interesting, is 65%. What does that mean? It means essentially 35% are aware, and we've already enrolled 40%. So there's an interesting, we have people enrolled that didn't know about the program, is what we actually conclude from this. And I think it's also good to note that 37% of those households with children are aware. What's important about these numbers is that it does reflect very, very significant progress since 2 years ago when it was last done. So every one of the covered populations has increased. And then lastly, the number of underconnected has been cut in half. So 2 years ago, it was 6%. Today, it's 3%. And much of that is actually attributable not only to the efforts of everyone that Scott talked about, but particularly the schools. We find that that has been a major strategy for getting more devices into more homes. So I think with that, we can also acknowledge when you make the transition to the online survey that there was amazing results that were very impressive to our professional surveying firm, and how you get a different profile of responders, more people in multiple languages, and of course, they're responding if they have a device. But the combination of these methodologies has now been endorsed pretty much across the board for researchers. And Pew Charitable Trust just published an article saying, if you want to get to the best information, you have to do these multiple methodologies in order not to have a skewing by people self-selecting into one channel or another. I dare say I am not aware of any more extensive research by any other state than here in California. And especially now when you have this data to compare to what we have on the online will be huge. Lastly, I'd like to thank RCRC, Rural County Representatives of California, and CSAC for helping as a group for neighboring region groupings of counties, rural counties that have been oversampled that will have data that we've never had before. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny, and thank you for the excellent transition into our next update, which is Rich Navas from the Broadband Equity Partnership to provide an update on the complimentary online public survey that we did. Rich?
Thank you, Deputy Director Adams. Thank you, everyone. I'm Rich Navas. I'm from Broadband Equity Partnership. We serve as program advisory and project management consultants to CDT. When we launched the survey with CDT on May 18th, we had a target of 10,000 survey responses. When we closed the survey on July 15th, we were absolutely elated that we received over 40,000 responses from across the state. And while we're incredibly grateful to a whole array of individuals, organizations, state agencies, and stakeholders who helped push out the survey across the state, there were notably 5 entities that helped to get us over 40,000 responses. They are the Communications Workers of America, AARP, Rural County Representatives of California, SANDAG, and LAISD. And as you can see, thanks to SANDAG's very successful texting campaign, San Diego County reached 12,432 survey responses, larger than most state surveys in other states. So we are incredibly grateful for the survey push across the state. Next slide. There's a previous slide. Thanks to AARP, we actually received the largest share of responses from individuals aged 60 and older. AARP did a campaign to push out the survey among their membership, and it was successful. We were also incredibly grateful for the over 16,000 responses we received from ethnic and minority communities, and also incredibly happy to see that we received over 3,000 responses from individuals with language barriers, limited English proficiency individuals, as well as limited literacy individuals. So we believe that a lot of this is due to the fact that we released the survey in 14 languages to accommodate the diverse communities across the state. As you can see from the chart on the right, we had over 2,000 responses in Spanish and almost 900 responses in Chinese. And every other language was used in the survey as well. We were also quite elated to see that over 7,000 individuals with disabilities completed this survey. We went through a great deal of effort to make sure that we collaborated with the Department of Rehabilitation to make sure the survey was accessible. We included audio functionality to accommodate individuals with sight impairments. So we were grateful to see the impact of making the survey accessible to as many communities as possible. We were also grateful to see over 500 responses from individuals from tribal communities. Next slide. We just wanted to give you a snapshot of some of the questions that we asked on the survey. We are going to do a deep dive on some of the more granular questions that we've posed to people across the state. While the majority of respondents indicated that they do have internet access, the 1,841 participants who said they don't have internet access cited that home internet services are too expensive, followed by the fact that internet services are not available or adequate where they live. And it's no surprise to us that the majority of respondents indicated that they use the smartphone to access the internet when they're at home. Next slide. So we will do a deep dive on the public survey in the coming weeks and incorporate a lot of the findings into our analysis in the State Digital Equity Plan. But we also want to give you a snapshot of what we did with the asset inventory across the state. We conducted an organizational survey concurrently with the online public survey. The organizational survey was called the Digital Equity Ecosystem Mapping Tool. We issued this tool to organizations across the state and had a separate DEAM tool for ISPs as well. Next slide. We had 420 responses for the DEAM tool and 34 responses from ISPs from across the state. So you can see from this map that the majority of counties are represented across the state, with a few counties in the Northeast that did not have organizations that responded. Next slide. The majority of organizations and entities that did submit responses to the DEAM tool were nonprofit organizations and CBOs, community-based organizations. We also had a lot of substantive data submitted by libraries, by schools, and workforce development organizations. And we also had submissions from county and city governments. So we're very eager to dive deep into the data that has been submitted. And we hope to incorporate all of our findings in the State Digital Equity Plan and make it available soon. Next slide. We do want to close this by mentioning that the majority of organizations that did respond indicated that they offer computer and device access as part of their digital equity programs and services, followed by skills training and technical support. So you can see an array of digital equity programs and services being offered by participating organizations. They did cite two top reasons or barriers that they're facing. These organizations face two major barriers to continuing their digital equity programs in the state, and they are lack of organizational capacity and lack of funding availability. That was followed by a lack of awareness and engagement in communities served, as well as difficulty accessing funding sources. So again, we'll be doing a deep dive and making a lot of this data available in the State Digital Equity Plan in the coming weeks. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Deputy Director Adams. Thank you.
Thank you, Richna and Sunny, so much for your updates on those. We wanted to, the fifth component of our digital equity planning process is ongoing stakeholder engagement that's kind of outside the previous four. So we have RSE here to talk briefly about, you know, those efforts and how it's raised awareness of the process. There's Sandra. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was having a little trouble unmuting. Happy to be here to give you an update on our task, which has been to make the information about how to get involved in the State Digital Equity Plan process as accessible and possible to reach millions of people across the state and those covered populations in every county throughout California. We've done that by creating promotional assets for partner toolkits to engage with CDT's network of over 5,000 digital equity partners and through outreach to media outlets throughout the state. We've also worked hard to amplify the components of the State Digital Equity Plan, such as encouraging participation in the Digital Equity Online Survey, encouraging attendance and maximizing coverage of the Broadband for All workshops, and encouraging participation in the DEAM tool. So on the next slide, you'll see that we quickly generated 185 assets that digital equity partners such as schools, libraries, nonprofits, ISPs, and universities could use to promote the various components of the digital equity plan among their communities. We recognize these organizations have relationships with their own communities and are ultimately the driving force behind the Broadband for All movement in California. So to make each community part of the conversation, we enlisted their help by deploying partner toolkits to promote the plan. These included social media graphics, printable handouts, flyers, invitation letters, template newsletter articles, media outreach materials, and more. And you might recognize some of the examples on the right of this slide. And we're happy to say that the digital equity partners throughout the state answered the call, and each of these assets were shared far and wide. The social media graphics alone were shared by over 200 digital equity partners throughout the state and were shared in 7 different languages to encourage participation among non-native English speakers. Many of the assets were translated into Spanish, Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Hmong, and Korean. And these social media graphics resulted in at least 30,000 impressions. And our team also designed a landing page for the state digital equity plan to help break down for community organizations and residents how to get involved in the process. The page included links to the survey, the DEEM tool, the regional planning workshops, and each of the meetings. Next slide, please. Also, to spread the word about the regional planning workshops and the public survey, we reached out to hundreds of media outlets across California. Between our outreach and the press materials that we generated as part of the partner toolkits, the digital equity plan had over 300 million impressions from media organizations. And you can see some of the television coverage on the right on the slide. This included 13 television segments, 4 radio segments, and 46 online articles. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to update you, and I'll turn it back to Director Bailey Crimmins.
Thank you, Sandra. What a great update from all of our partners. I'd like to open it up to our members to see, work group members, if they have any questions or comments for what you heard during our session. All right, Commissioner Houck.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that's a lot of information, a lot of work that's being done, a lot of very impressive work. So thank you for that. And it's providing very valuable information for moving forward with the plan and our Broadband for All initiative.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions? I don't see any on the dais. Are there any in remotely? All right, Miss McPeak, thank you.
This is too valuable time, Madam Chair, without an additional comment. It is a lot of information, and even when you're in the middle of it, instead of stepping back and taking stock, one of the assets that I think you the state will have, I know you will have, and that maybe we should just underscore, is that in trying to have reliable methodologies that are not really, really expensive, but to know where people are, how we're doing, what the metrics are, for our own metrics for accountability, and how we get that data. The combination of these various methodologies, what we did just on the phone survey, then taking that and looking at the oversampling that has been done also by phone, and then the 40,000 online surveys will give us some insights as to what methodologies we can use, and know what that gap is in terms of being off from the statistical average, so that you could just do something that is rather cost effective and not as expensive as random digit dialing that no one in the country is still doing because it is so expensive. So this might actually be the last time anybody sees this extensive an RDD phone survey, but we will have data to, if you will, validate and calibrate these other methodologies. And just in the oversampling that we're doing of rural counties, which is another 850 surveys in that oversampling, that is random digit dialing, that in other surveys, that population is only about 18% of all sampling. So now we have and out of a survey that was, 1650 would be under 300. So it's an amazing amount of data that will give us this, again, the tool of looking at in comparison what you can rely on in the future and not have such a difficult, expensive process of random digit dialing.
Thank you. I also want to thank the public who had participated. I mean, those numbers would not have happened. I know we do all our outreach, but if they were not engaged and willing to give us their feedback. So I want to do a shout out to all of the residents of California that participated in all different channels. So thank you very much, because the data is very, very important, and it will drive the equity plan, will drive what funds we receive from the federal government, and really how that helps each of your communities. So please. We do now have a hand up. So see, if I talk long enough, it will happen. I can't see that far. So if someone would please call on that person for me, thank you.
I guess my camera's on. Does that mean I've been?
Mr. Fellow.
Thank you very much. Yeah, this is Jeff Fellow from Department of Ed. Appreciate the very in-depth details. I was wondering, I know you can't give away all the draft, but is there any more details that you can share about kind of what was surfaced in education and kind of where we're headed with education outcomes in the digital equity plan? Some things that those of us in education space can start preparing for. Really appreciated hearing about all the updates and the surveys and the responses. So just wondering about where all those might be heading us in the education space.
Yeah, Jeff, thanks for asking the question, and thanks for all the strong support from the Department of Education and the County Office of Education and individual school sites that were represented in the process. Without going too far into this, what I can say is that a lot of what we heard back from the working groups and the workshops are fairly consistent with some of the suggestions that came out of the high-speed network advisory group that the Department of Education faced, and at a real high level, acknowledging like the foundation of digital inclusion beyond, like once you get past like service and device, it's having these digital skills, both, the entry, the intermediate and advanced that we've heard about, like the National Digital Skills Coalition talked about, was the integration of digital literacy and skills training at all levels of education, from K-12 to community colleges to even higher ed, knowing that different people enter the systems at different places. And as, Jacob said in his poem at the beginning, you can have a high school student that goes to a UC that might not have the same digital literacy skills as someone else. So that was one. I think continuing to leverage the schools is digital navigators, and to leverage their ability through ECF and other programs to do device programs, which was something that was a conversation earlier today. And then taking a look at the unique position schools might be in to help support the continued improvement of state broadband maps, given some of the interesting work that's been going on in the state in places like Fresno and other places. So I think at a high level, those are the main buckets of the information and the recommended strategies we're getting back.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Cool. Now that I have the floor, that's great. I know this relates to the work we're doing with digital equity plan and everything, but when's that going to be the opportunities for schools to kind of facilitate those last mile conversations, build those, local connections, and, if you think of like, okay, there's a random school out there, a random community that doesn't have it, and it's going to, they want the middle mile, of course, and the digital equity, but they also want last mile. And, how can I best help that rural community or even that urban community, like he was mentioned in the beginning, have them band together and go, hey, okay, we have this project, we're going to connect everybody at home. Is that going to be a part of that? How do we build that? Because I think that would be really helpful for schools, because they kind of know best where those last pockets are, both in the urban or rural and the urban areas, as our key person kicked us off this morning on. Actually, I guess it was this afternoon.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate the question. I think more broadly, what we've learned about the process is we need to continue to expand the support and capacity network to help folks understand where to find themselves in the process and which programs, which are, if you're like an ISP or a city, a town, a tribe, or a school, to navigate and find the program that's appropriate for them. And whether it's utilizing existing resources or developing another structure or framework like a digital navigation program for entities, for instance. But then I would defer to Commissioner Houck or someone from the PUC, because there's some direct actionable steps that people can take right now that don't have to wait for the digital equity plan to be solved. Commissioner Houck?
Yes, and one of the areas that the PUC is expanding on in our communications division is hiring caseworkers or community navigators for each county. And so that's a resource too that can be very helpful, because the idea is that we're going to have people that can connect locally. They're going to be focused on a certain geographical region within that county and get familiar with it, know who the players are, be able to connect people, work with them. The consortias are also resources that folks can reach out to. And I know for rural areas, RCRC is doing an extensive amount of work on trying to get folks connected. So I think there's a lot of resources out there, and we just need to make sure people are talking to each other and getting the information they need to get the results that we all want to see.
Yeah, and Commissioner Houck, I think that that's just another thing we heard about the process itself, is that we've all learned so much about what everyone is doing and how it complements with each other, but to continue to refine how we're connecting the dots and putting information and resources in simple places where people can find what they need quickly and to do that. So there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff adding to what's already out.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the responses. We also have another item that Mr. Adams was going to talk about, which is related to the digital equity planning and the timeline event. So I'll go ahead and turn it back to you. And then after that, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment and discussion. Go ahead, Mr. Adams.
John, I'm waiting for the slide to initiate so I can see. So just wanted to make sure we went over the next steps. Our last, for the moment, tribal collaboration Alkamari working group meeting is this Friday, July 28th. We expect to have the draft digital equity plan and public comment period late summer, probably more like early fall, just given the amount of data that we're crunching. We're going to have to push that out into the fall. The next statewide planning group meeting is October 25th, where we will more than likely be reporting out to this group about comments that folks have made regarding the draft and how we will incorporate those into refining the final draft. Finer point on timeline. We are currently due to have our final draft plan into NTIA by the fourth quarter of 2023. Here in California, Assembly Bill 2750 that was authored by Assemblymember Bonta, has a deadline of January 1st of 2024. That is our final deadline. And then the digital equity capacity grants, as Ms. Palpalatok said in her comments, are the first quarter of 2024. So that's it for me. And I think we go to Maria.
Maria Ellis.
Hi. I'm Maria Ellis. I am
Oh, is that
the,
okay? Is that you?
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Maria Ellis. I'm the Deputy Director for Broadband at the California Public Utilities Commission. I think the commissioner did a really great job of hitting most of a really great detailed list of timeline and next steps. A couple of things I just would highlight. So this is my only slide. It's really similar, just a bit more detail from what the commissioner shared. I wanted to note that the 5-year action plan, and just to kind of put it into context as it relates to the initial proposal and final proposal, the 5-year action plan is really a high-level document. It's meant for us to map the ecosystem, how we're thinking about data, and any analysis that we've done to date that could feed into this, partnerships, et cetera. And so it won't necessarily have, a lot of the details in terms of rules, guidelines, and whatnot as it relates to the program, just because we're still in the process of that deliberative process through the open rulemaking. But so just think of that 5-year action plan in that kind of high level. The difference with the initial proposal is that will include all of the detail, the substantive structure of the program. And important for us to note, the way that we are going to be approaching that is that CPUC will be submitting both Volume 1 and Volume 2 together, which is to say of the initial proposal, which is to say that we will be including information about the challenge process, as well as all the program rules, guidelines, criteria, overall structure, as we're going to be submitting that as one. In terms, the commissioner did mention that we will have several opportunities to continue to engage, and from here through December as we're developing that plan, including at least 2 public participation hearings, possibly 3, some technical workshops. And we've also gotten over 25 requests, I believe, for one-on-one consultations from tribes as a result of the partnership that we've done, the engagement partnerships that we've done with CDT. I'm happy to put that information of how to, if tribes would like to have a consultation with CPUC, and I can put the information for our tribal advisor, Kenneth Holbrook, into the chat. In terms of once we submit the proposal, we will continue to do engagement as well, just to start socializing some of the aspects of that. And once we receive approval from NTIA, we will make any necessary modifications to ensure that it's in line with NTIA, compliant with NTIA guidelines and federal rules. And as the commissioner said, then we'll take formal action to approve the program rules. Again, I think, the theme for this conversation has been engagement, and CPUC will be doing a lot of the same thing as we are moving through this process in development of the initial proposal. And after the initial proposal is adopted, we will do engagement related to understanding the challenge process. We will do lots of engagement related to how to make folks ready, and informational sessions to get communities ready and potential applicants ready for the application process. We will, as the commissioner said, submit our final proposal 365 days after the approval of our initial proposal, which is likely in early 2025. And both of those documents, the initial and the final, will be out for public comment, and you will have plenty, stakeholders will have plenty of opportunity to provide written comments, as well as to engage with us at some of these other forums. And while all of this is happening, from here until that time that we are submitting our, running our solicitation process, one of the things that we're working on eagerly here at CPUC is getting ready for the administration of this program. It's by far one of the most, given the size of California, and the size of, it's a blessing to have 1.86 billion, but it is a large program to administer, and it's a complex program to administer. So we are in the process of doing some of the more housekeeping items internally to CPUC to ensure that we can execute on this program in a timely manner and meet all our deadlines and make it as successful as possible. So we'll be hiring lots of folks and doing all the contracting and the systems developments that are needed to to administer this kind of sophisticated program. Those were really my only additions to the commissioner's talking points.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis and Mr. Adams. I'd like to open it up to our members quickly to see if you have any questions about the timeline before we go to public comment. Commissioner Houck, you want to?
I just have a comment to add on to what Maria said, that what we're doing right now is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's an exciting opportunity to get in on the ground floor. We are going to need lots of people to help us out. So anybody listening that's interested in wanting to work on this program, please consider applying because we are hiring. So just wanted to put that plug in there.
CDT is also hiring. No, so thank you, Commissioner Houck. Yes, it's a large program that we're all going to need to run and operate, definitely. Any other comments from the dais?
I was just going to say those job postings will go out in the monthly email update
Okay, sounds good.
for all of us. So
Any members remotely? Do I see anybody online? Okay, we see none, so we'll go ahead. Ms. Nguyen, if you please remind the public of the Q&A protocols, and we'll get started with that part of the agenda.
Thank you. We will now open Q&A to all attendees. Please use your raise hand feature on Zoom or *9 if you are calling in by phone. In order to ensure others have the time allotted, please limit your comment or questions to 2 minutes per entity or organization so that others have a chance to participate. Laura will now review questions we've received throughout. And also as a note, the order that we will go through is on Zoom, call in, and any comment received via emails. Laura?
Thanks, Anne. I'm going to start with the questions that came in through Q&A throughout the meeting today. So the first question is, what was the CPUC proceeding number for adding input for the 5-year action plan draft? That was answered in the Q&A, but I wanted to just restate the question for anybody who may have missed it. And then the response to that, for those of you who are online, is R.23-02-016. Second question that came in is, how can we register for future digital equity statewide planning group meetings? Yay, you want to be here, that's great. We register through the portal. And so Cole has put a link into the Q&A for that. And we can also put that link in chat so that everyone can see it. So that's on the Broadband for All portal under events. And then there's a section for the digital equity planning process. The third question, and I believe Miss McPeak, this is for you because it pertains to the phone survey. How many individuals does the 3% account for underconnected?
So if I understand the question, it is how many, what's the absolute number out of 1650 that the underconnected would be? Or let me just say the percentage is 3%. In that sample, it's 3% of 1650 are the absolute numbers that we had. But it's the 3% of the population that is underconnected that is really important, and that is within a 3% margin of error.
Thank you, Sunny. And go ahead, Miss. The only thing I'd add to that is, I know there's also, if we're out on broadband, the broadband action plan, we do also identify there's 675,000 unserved. I know there's underserved and others, but that is the number that we have had out there recently. 1 in 5 Californians.
Yeah.
So those are the numbers that we've been communicating. Great, thank you both. And I'm not sure who asked the question, but if you want to go ahead and put in chat whether that addressed your question or not, or if you had any follow-up, please feel free to do that. This question is from Rebecca. Okay. I will wait then, and we'll go to that question, Rebecca, when we go through the Zoom participants. And I'll read through the next 2 questions.
So the next question is, will this group not meet again until October 25th? That is correct. The next meeting will be at the same time, 12 to 2 on October 25th. We had some other meetings today. And it will also be listed on the Broadband for All portal as we stated before. Question for, this is going to be for CPUC. For BEAD prospective subgrantees, will subgrantees be required to match grant funds, or is that something that the eligible entity, State of California, is covering?
There is a match requirement for the BEAD program per the NOFO. There is an outstanding question in the proceeding to talk about that explores what kind of funding can be used for that match.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I think it's a 25% match. And again, the rulemaking will address that, but it's fairly flexible as compared to other programs that have strict requirements about where the match funding has to come from.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Houck and Ms. Ellis. Just going to double check and see if we have any additional ones that came through. That was the last of our questions that came through in Q&A. So we're going to go to the Zoom hands, and Rebecca, I think this will address your question. So feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, thank you very much. Rebecca Kawuma speaking on behalf of Greater LA County. So I do have a quick follow-up question, and I think this goes well with the initial conversation that this group was having pertaining to capacity building. So obviously you guys have a very robust timeline, and that's super exciting. And my follow-up question is, what recommendations do you have for larger cities and smaller cities and also counties to start preparing in forms of capacity building for being able to apply for BEAD funding? And are there any recommendations that you guys have? I know you guys did post in the questions section of the meeting who would qualify as a sub-grantee. So would it make sense to have a larger entity perhaps apply for the funding and then have a sub-grantee as part of that process? I'm just trying to start brainstorming to see like what types of strategies and coalitions could be developed to ultimately deploy this funding and to ensure that we have capacity for some of those smaller cities that may not have a digital equity person, like perhaps my former entity, such as the city of Long Beach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Rebecca. I'm gonna, since you were talking about BEAD and the subgrantees, I'm going to defer to either Ms. Ellis or Commissioner Houck on that.
Thank you.
I would just preface it that we are going through the rulemaking process right now. So to the extent folks have feedback or comments on that, they can provide it in the proceeding. We've got a list of the elements that we need to consider as to how the money gets allocated. So I don't think we're making calls on that particular issue, and that the rules for the program are in the process of being set up. So if there's issues we should be considering about how that works, we would really like to have that incorporated into the proceeding and get those comments so we can consider that when coming up with our initial draft proposal.
Understood. Thank you so much. So just to make sure that I'm on the same page in regards to next steps, you're recommending that we put all of that insight based on how we would like that to be structured as part of the rulemaking public comment process, and then ultimately that will be utilized to decide what that initial implementation portion would look like. Is that correct?
Yes, we're developing a record right now, taking public comments from organizations, entities, and then consistent with the federal requirements that we have to meet, we'll be developing the rules. So, and that will be based on the record in the proceeding. So yes, if you have particular thoughts about how to best set the process up to maximize what we can do for different size municipalities, we definitely want to hear that information and have that included in our record.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And one other quick follow-up question, and this perhaps may be directed to the California Department of Technology team. So a lot of great work done with community engagement, and I just want to echo all of the recognition that has been shared here, and very thankful for all of the work that you guys did in Long Beach and hosting that session as well. So thank you again to your team and the CETF team. My question is, in regards to circling back with the community, I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about what that process will look like for engagement and really showing the community, here's what we heard from you. Is this what we heard is correct and aligns with what you initially shared, and what that feedback loop will look like with the communities that engage, whether it was through the phone survey, other engagement efforts, if they attended the actual workshops and stuff like that, and how can us as stakeholders that helped facilitate those engagements help with that feedback loop process?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca, and thank you for all the partnership and work that we've done over the last year and a half or so, and specifically on the regional planning event in Long Beach. So let me see if I can answer that question correctly. On the all of the regional workshops, so everyone who registered or attended an event, as long as they logged in and gave us their email address, was sent copies of the presentations we went over, and the tabulated results of the recommended strategies and prioritization numbers. And so those went out to everybody. Those will also be posted online if they're not already posted. Similar with other parts of the planning process are outcome area working groups, the videos, the slides, the transcripts are posted as part of the record that will all inform the digital equity plan. And so how stakeholders can continue to participate in the process and let us know if we've got it right is when the draft digital equity plan is developed. We are required to post it for a 30-day public comment period so that folks can review our work, and if there's anything missed out or that we got wrong, can suggest that we change that. And did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I just want to make sure that we know that that information is coming, which is great. And we can definitely circle back with all of our community and stakeholders that participated to ensure that they are able to double check and make sure that the information that was captured there reflects their lived experiences and stuff like that. So thank you, and looking forward to hearing more about next steps.
Thank you, Rebecca. And just for those who, oh, I'm sorry.
Laura, I just was going to say, Ms. McPeak wanted to say something real quick.
If I was going to follow up, just to add to all of that, Rebecca, first of all, thank you for doing so much planning for the Long Beach workshop, and then you couldn't attend. So she did all of that and then wasn't even able to participate. But in Los Angeles, you've got an amazing constellation of leadership and organizations that I would really encourage you to convene together with all of those materials that have been sent back to you by the Department of Technology, and work with the processes you have you've got the Regional Broadband Consortium, that's LADL. SCAG is very, very involved. You, of course, have all of that expertise from Long Beach, the County of Los Angeles with Delete the Divide, the County Office of Education, that's part of the Delete the Divide. Really, I think if you call the meeting and really start that joint effort to review the data while the digital equity plan is being compiled. And then on the survey information, that always goes online so that you can query it and get a lot of additional information for Los Angeles County, which is, a quarter of the population, and will have a lot of robust data within the samples.
Thank you, Ms. McPeak. Laura?
Thank you. And just a reminder for those of you who are interested in commenting on the BEAD rulemaking, Cole did put that proceeding number in the chat. So that's there for you as well. Follow up on what Rebecca had asked also about BEAD. We do have one more question that came in. Scott actually just addressed it, which was once the draft of the digital equity plan is publicly available, how long will the public have to comment on that? And that is going to be a 30-day public comment period. Hands up, I see Patrick, you have your hand up. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, yes. Thank you for all the updates, especially interesting to see all the developments on the surveying. So thank you for all the diligence there. Quick question for the CPUC. We are working with a private partner, exploring a partnership in Oakland to build out a fiber network. They have asked us for the funding eligible unserved locations, but in the FFA applicant tool, it still presents those hexagons and not address level data. What should we tell to our private partner about how they can get those specific addresses to help build out the network plan? Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Maria, I'm going to ask you to answer that. Is there someone on staff that we can connect Patrick with to get the information he needs for their consultant?
Yeah, hi, Patrick. Yes, so I think unfortunately the answer is still similar to the same one that we shared last time we met about this. It's so we are still working with our vendor. We are limited in our ability to share some of that information. And so right now we're working on getting that license but I can't give you an ETA. But just know that we are very aware of it. We've voiced this concern. We know that other folks would also like to have access to that data. So there is a solution coming from the vendor, but we are still waiting on that. And we just need to stay in compliance with the licensing agreements.
Thank you, Maria. I don't see any more hands up, but I've got to think that there's some more questions out there. So I'm just going to take a pause. And if you guys have any questions that you would like to pose to the group here, please feel free to raise your Zoom hand. If you have called in, please hit *9 and that will raise your hand from your dial-in number. All right, Director Bailey Crimmins, I do not see any more comments. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I want to first thank everyone that attended the second statewide digital equity planning group meeting. I know we're answering questions, but it is a working meeting. So that's what the whole purpose of this is. And as we reiterated, the next meeting will be held on October 25th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we want to reiterate how critical the planning process is to achieving digital equity throughout the state and addressing the digital divide. We would also like to invite individuals to attend our final tribal collaboration outcome area working group, which is this Friday, July 28th. And with that, thank you for all your continued engagement and participation in digital equity, because we know there is no equity without digital equity. And I will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.